Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. This time for Monk Chat, joined by special guest Bante J back at Empty Cloud.
Good to be back.
So today we're going to be doing our usual programming, answering questions, and so if you have any questions about Buddhism, Buddha Dhamma Sangha, feel free to leave those in the live chat, and we will try to answer them to the best of our ability. And we see joining in Rick, Harry, Maria, Cows Are Friends, Val, Bhumika, and I'm sure other people will be joining in as well. So I hope that you're all having a good night and doing well in your practice. And it looks like we already have our first question. It's from Harry, who asks, well, maybe we should actually render homage to the Buddha first. I forgot. I lost myself. Okay, so we'll render homage to the Buddha and then go ahead and answer questions. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. Okay, so now we can start it. And our first question is from Harry, who asks, the suttas instruct us to make our mind like earth against criticism, but I'm very sensitive toward how others perceive me and feel anxious. How can I train to remain economous as instructed?
Well, different people are going to have different abilities with these kind of things. But basically, what I would say is when you however somebody perceives or says something about you or to you, you reflect, well, is this true or is it not? So you're kind of questioning. You're not just automatically accepting it. Is this true or is it not? If it's true, it might be actually something that you can use to better yourself. Like, there's actually some truth to this. Maybe they're doing it or saying it in a malicious way, and you don't have to accept that. But there might be some truth to that. On the other hand, also, you have no control over other people's perceptions. Right? In the sutras, the Buddha says the earth, people spit on the earth and they throw dirt on the earth and feces on the earth and all these things, and then yet the earth abides equanimously. Right? The earth does not bother the earth. Right? So this is where developing this ability where the Buddha says, "Kanti paramang tapo titika," patient endurance is the best practice. Right, so we practice. When you hear something, somebody says something about you or to you. If you're a practitioner, we can observe how do I feel hearing that? Right, what is my reaction? Right, what do I want to do? What do I want to say? And you observe that whole process in your mind, in your body, and you try to be with that. And then eventually, you realize, oh, you know what? This has nothing to do with me. The Buddha said, there is nobody who escapes praise and blame. Right? Even the Buddha, you read the suttas, you can see it's not every sutta. Everybody's like, oh, Buddha, you're so wonderful. No, people had a lot of things to say about the Buddha, not always good things, right? That's their problem. That's not you. And so, if you are just starting out, and you have, like you say, you have a little bit of, anxiousness about this, do that questioning, do that investigating, right? You hear something and you challenge it, you question it, you investigate it, and observe how you react to it. And as you're doing that over a long period of time, then you'll be able to realize that actually it just causes me more suffering to act in this way when I hear this. Right? There's nobody who doesn't have anybody who, there's nobody who has everybody in existence that loves them. Right? Not me, not you, not the Buddha. There's always going to be people that don't like you. Always going to be people that have things to say about you. But it's up to you to train yourself so that you don't cause yourself extra suffering because of that.
Great.
Anything to add? Or? No.
Well, I think that's pretty thorough. Maybe I'll just share a story though, because it's relevant to what Bhante was saying. And in Italy, I was recently in Italy, and there was a bunch of teenagers meeting in this little square outside of Ayasoma's elderly mom's apartment. And they took a tissue, I think probably got it wet or spat on it, I don't know, and they chucked it at the window where the monks were, because they saw the monks were up there. And it was right where the Buddha statue was. Like the altar was in that window. And so they threw this dirty tissue at the window. And Ayasoma didn't clean it up. She just left it there it was there for probably weeks, maybe months. It was sitting there. And one of the teenagers who was there was like, why didn't you remove the tissue from the window? And Ayasoma told her the story of the Brahmin who someone came insulting the Buddha, as just throwing insults and criticizing him. And the Buddha said, what do you do when you bring someone a gift and the person doesn't want it, the person doesn't receive it? And he says, well, I guess then I would keep the gift. And the Buddha says, well, then you can keep your gift, right? So she told the little teenager, like the girl, the story, and she was really blown away. She found it really, really interesting. So that's another kind of theme about this, is similar to no one can escape criticism, is that, and not necessarily having to receive it, but not also feeling offended. Like, just like when someone brings us a gift and we don't want it, just they can keep the gift because they're the one who said it in the first place. So it's their gift and we don't have to accept. Okay, the next question is from, I see other people, Meredith, Sean, Victoria, Jody, Mano, Kim, Chittapala, Mary. Okay, and Andrew says, what advice did the Buddha give specifically regarding lust for edible food?
So the Buddha said that if one is practicing rightly, then one would eat food like parents who have gone across the desert and they have to eat their child to survive, right? And so one would be eating the food, they would be eating, the meat of the child, and they wouldn't be excited and thrilled about it. They would just be eating it to survive, right? So that's kind of like the attitude that the Buddha gives in terms of how you should eat food. Right? If you go to a monastery, you'll hear a chant that the monks do, either in Pali, and sometimes some places will also do the English so you understand what they're saying. And it's a reflection on why we eat food. Not for enjoyment, not for making yourself beautiful or buff or whatever, just for the continuation of this body. Right now, socially, people eat food for a variety of different reasons. It's how families and friends come together and all these kind of extra social things added to the food. But if you are trying to, be a Buddhist practitioner and a mindful practitioner, then you are trying to be mindful as to why you are eating the food, right? And also trying to be mindful in terms of your likes and dislikes. You see the food and you're like, well, I guess I have to eat, or you see the food and you're like, oh, I want more of this, I want more of that. And you can observe how those likes and dislikes actually cause suffering, right? Because maybe you want to have more of what you like and less of what you dislike, and you get more of what you dislike and less of what you like. That's usually how it goes sometimes. So this is observing and being mindful of food as what you specifically need for your health, more than what you like and what you dislike. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. And this might be the shortest monk chat in history. Only
hey, I get to go
minutes.
To bed early. Yeah. I'm okay with that.
So we're out of questions, and so we'll wait a few moments and see if anything else comes in, or if anything is here in person. Of course, people are welcome.
But I have to be up at 5 a.m. So the more time
we have a question from Victoria. Okay. Okay, Victoria wants you up tonight, Monte.
All right.
She says, welcome back, Monte Jaisara. Can you talk a bit about where you've been staying recently in Colorado?
Yeah. Well, in many different places. When I go to Colorado, this last time I spent 2 months there, and I spend time in multiple Thai Thai monasteries in Colorado Springs and Denver. And usually when I go, I spend time. There's one Sri Lankan monk there in Denver, but he was in South Korea during my stay, so I didn't get to stay with him. Mostly, I just stayed with other than those 2 monasteries, I stayed with lay people. So, Colorado Springs, Denver, and this time I was my first visit to Fort Collins. A couple of the Buddhist groups there set up a kind of event for me at a art gallery, which was quite nice. And so, yeah, that's, I've been going to Colorado for those of you who don't know, I've been going to Colorado for about 3 years. And just, meeting people, making connections, teaching at the various insight and Vipassana groups there, and seeing if I can't eventually create a forest monastery and retreat center in Colorado in the years to come. So that's kind of what I'm doing, visiting Colorado multiple times. And for those of you who do follow me, I have a special announcement coming out in the next week or so. So keep an eye out, and you'll see what's going on with Colorado.
Have you done any retreats there, Monte, yet, or?
No, just day-long stuff.
Okay.
I've actually been wanting to do day-longs or like camping retreats and things like that. But every time I'm there, it's in the colder months. So.
That would actually be nice in the mountains. Yeah, it'd be beautiful. Okay, we have a question from Manal who says, a question from a friend: what has been the most impactful sutta for you?
Oh, that's like. I know Bhante Siddhaso has the same question. It's like, then you start listing off, and it's like 5, 10, 15 different suttas. I mean, I guess I have to say Satipatthana, because that's like the core of my practice. The Satipatthana is probably the most impactful sutta. Foundations of mindfulness. After that, the 5 recollections. You're subject to old age, sickness, and death. Simile of the arrow. But yeah, Satipatthana has to be number 1 for me, I guess.
I think it's really hard to answer also. I think what comes to mind right now in this moment, though, is actually a little bit of an obscure one. But it's in the Samyutta Nikaya on dependent origination. There's one in there with the Buddha talks about his enlightenment, but it's a very particular one. And he talks about how consciousness, vijnana, and name and form, namarupa, condition one another. And I think probably that's one of the suttas I've gone back to the most over and over again. So actually, I think it's 12.65. Samyutta Nikaya 12.65. I think it's not what would have first usually what I would say, but for some reason at this time, that's really what comes to mind for me. Yeah, really deep sutta. Okay, and then Kim has a good question. It says, can you tell about the benefits of chanting?
Keeps you up when you have to wake up early? Maybe, actually. I've kind of nodded off during chanting. So.
That's impressive.
No, really what chanting is for memorization. That's really what it's for. It's kind of like keeping the Dhamma close. And this is why, unless you're at a monastery and you have to chant what they chant, if you're just a lay person, really, if you're going to chant what you what's really impactful, like the sutta, like we just went over, something that's really impactful for you, chant it. Right. And as you do that over and over again, it's in your mind. Right. It's very different from reading the Dhamma and having it in your mind. Right? This is why in the Buddha's day, it was all just in the mind. And so you had, most monks probably had the equivalent of a small book, at least, of Dhamma in their mind. And it's right there. And in the mind, it's able to kind of settle and kind of merge with other things and make connections, and you have wisdom arise from that. So that's what I would say really, like the point of chanting is. And there's extra things like it's good for like people who are like faith followers and stuff like that. And in some places and some traditions, it's very kind of melodious, so people kind of maybe like that as well. But that's, I guess, what I would say about chanting. But there's lots of different perspectives. So
yeah, I mean, one thing that comes to mind, kind of riffing off what Bante was just saying, is, and I was saying this recently. Someone was talking, can't remember, maybe about memorization, but it's really true. Like, we're going to have Vesak on May 4th, and most American people, when they hear May 4th, or many people, they might think, oh, Star Wars, May the 4th be with you.
yeah.
And so people have like all these songs and movies, especially in like America, which is a very young country, or I would say in all of the Americas, which are very newly like colonized countries, that most of the culture is like music and movies and recent, politicians or authors or whatever, like very recent things. And so most of what people have in their mind, and they just memorize it from childhood naturally, is like pop music or all these different lyrics, and then they start making all these connections. And as Bante said, that that's not really what you want to be making connections with, and you want to be having Dhamma in your mind. So then you see something and you think about a Dhamma, like you think about a line from the from the Buddhist teachings, and you start to connect it with other things you experience, and it all kind of comes together instead of having like a mixture of pop culture around there, rattling around in your head. That's not really what you want to have to develop wisdom and character and clarity. And the other thing that I found from chanting also is, like, if you have a lot of thoughts, or you have the mind is tired, then you can do chanting, and it can really just uplift the mind through that kind of, especially if you have something that you know familiar, well, but also if it's difficult, then that can really kind of shake up the mind out of its normal habits. But then just chanting like that, then you start to do something a little bit more active, which is still focused. It's not scattered thoughts or emotions or tired, dull mind, but it's a focused, clear mind. And especially if it's something that you really recollect the meaning of it, then it starts to give you a lot of faith and a lot of inspiration. And so then you clear your mind up, you get a little bit more focused, a little bit more sharp, and then you have some faith. And so it can be really good for meditation, like before meditation, especially, or just if you're trying to manage your time and the meditation getting a little bit dull. I think chanting is one of the really good practices.
It's funny, as you were mentioning the movie things, I saw this, and I saw Good Morning Vietnam. I was thinking of the movie, but it's Hyun Vo from Vietnam. So hello. So as soon as while you're saying it, I have a movie connection right there. Interesting. Yeah.
Wow, this is a very slow. That's the last question so far online. This is the slowest monk chat I've ever experienced, I think.
Very good, especially for 30 people being on.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything in person?
Yeah. We have a big crowd here at the monastery, so.
I could ask a question. The Wednesday in the suta, you were saying, restrain the senses in meditation, or using medication, restrain the senses. Do you remember this?
I think I remember what you're saying. Are you wondering what I was meaning?
Like what happened when we are meditating, how we restrain the senses? What is the connection between restraining the senses and meditating? Yeah, what I was saying was that the axle, like the turning point in the whole practice is sense restraint, because when you follow virtue, so like you start giving dana, you start giving food and being more generous, and you start following precepts and so on, then you start building these qualities, you start training your intentions through your actions and your physical actions. And so you start developing wholesome intentions of heart, wholesome intentions in the mind. You start lifting your mind, you start removing toxic intentions, which would really heavy stuff that feeds the hindrances, like really strong greed and strong hatred and strong delusion. And so the fuel for the hindrances, you start starving it when you start practicing generosity and virtue. But a lot of people practice generosity and virtue, but their meditation, they really struggle with the meditation. And that's because that's the first step. But then before you go to the meditation and the gradual training,
there's a crucial turning point, which is the sense restraint. That's where you start going from working with your intentions on a physical level, and you start moving away and start working directly with the mind, but you're not yet just kind of isolated down. Just meditation is a kind of sensory intentional isolation, right? You're intentionally not looking at things and listening to things and thinking about random things and smelling things and tasting things. So you're training your mind in order to be content without sensory experiences, and in a very difficult way, right? So sense restraint, you need that transition period. It's like you're walking across the bridge, and the bridge is sense restraint. Otherwise, yes, the one side, it supports the bridge, like the generosity and the virtue, they're necessary. You can't have a bridge without that support. But in the other side, the meditation is also support. So sense restraint it's in a context. However, without that bridge, without that sense restraint, then the meditation really, it won't take off. And then the other thing is that if you meditate, maybe you get some good results every now and then. But if you meditate and then you come out of meditation and then you start, getting angry at your dog and yelling at your neighbors and indulging in food and indulging in distractions, then it's going to be hit every time. It's going to be hit or miss, because the meditation is completely divorced from what you're doing with your senses all the other time. So what I was saying is that meditation is just a more advanced form of sense restraint, and it has to be consistent. So you practice sense restraint in order to transition from everyday virtue into meditation. And then when you practice meditation, you're just developing the exact same practice you've been doing throughout the day, of like being mindful of your experience and not reacting to it, but developing equanimity, peace, developing intentions of kindness and non-hatred, developing awareness without sleepiness, developing peace without restlessness, and developing clarity about how to develop skillful states. You go through that when you start practicing sense restraint. You go through that, but you're doing it in motion. So meditation is just a continuation. And if you don't walk that bridge and you just try to meditate, just try to swim across the river, then usually you're going to get swept away. The meditation is just it's going to be, maybe you'll have some success every now and then, but it's always going to be an uphill battle, because it's like you've been revving up, indulging in the senses. Then you meditate, and now you're trying to calm that all down. Okay, calm down. And then by the time you're finished, you just start undoing all the work you did in the meditation again by indulging in the senses. So you have to walk that bridge in order to make the meditation easier and in order to maintain it. So that's what I was really saying. And then meditation, you start to see it from a different perspective. Like most people, they see meditation as like, how can I relieve stress from my everyday life? But that's not what the Buddha was teaching meditation for. I mean, that's a benefit for some people, but he's teaching meditation as a gradual training in order to realize enlightenment, in order to be free from rebirth. And that includes, if you want to be free, you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? You can't, I want to be enlightened, but then I also want to enjoy sensual pleasures, and I want to have a partner, and I want to live my life and distract myself with entertainment. No, it doesn't work that way. Enlightenment is letting all that go. So you have to willingly do that at the beginning. You have to willingly let go of these engagements. And that's where sense restraint kind of fits in. So that's what I was saying, the connection between the restraint and the meditation.
All right.
Okay, now we have from Victoria. Have you ever seen a head monk ask someone to leave a monastery due to behaviors that are harmful to the community? Are there frequent problems and personalities that tend to arise?
Not only a head monk, I've been that person. Because of my previous career doing child protective services, working with people with mental illness and drug use and all that stuff. At Bhavana, whenever there was like, oh, we need to ask this person to leave, it's like, okay, Jayasara, you do it. So I've had to handle that kind of situation many times. There's all kinds of people that come to a monastery, and in the West, at least, a lot of people who feel like they wouldn't be accepted anywhere else kind of feel like Buddhism would just accept them. And to an extent, that's correct. But on the other hand, you do have to think about the community. This is like with monastics. This is why it's actually, there's so many restrictions to even have somebody become a monastic, because you have to think about how that person becoming a monastic impacts the community, not just the community locally, but also the community at a larger scale, right? So there's always this kind of understanding of the greater impact of the community. And so, yeah, sometimes people cannot stay there. Sometimes people have to go. And, for some people, it's hard because they're attached and, they don't want anybody to suffer and but it's also usually a very good lesson in letting go of other people's suffering. Right? Yes, we have to be compassionate for this person. But I mean, how many times have I just remember at Bhavana being like, Bhante, I know we have to be compassionate, but what about compassionate for the rest of us who live here? When I was trying to argue, like, no, this person needs to go. So there's competing compassion sometimes, I guess. But yeah, no, this is common. Anytime there's a community, and anytime you are working with the public, like people coming for retreats and visiting, stuff like that, you have to be able to do that. At least one person in the community has to be able to be the bouncer, as it were. Yeah.
And are there particular problems, Bhante, that Victoria should avoid when she visits monasteries? Any particular personality traits that she'll...
Not particularly. I think that, when you do visit a monastery, you go to anywhere that there's a group of people, you just have to be mindful of the group dynamics. And in any group, there's going to be a certain percentage of people who are untrustworthy and you should, be wary of. And yes, that's at monasteries or anything else, any place else. You have to be wary of these kind of things. But if you're just, very mindful and very aware, then you can make sure that everything is okay, right? And if you have to, I mean, there were times at Bhavana where there was a bad visitor or a bad resident, and I saw people leave because of them, and I never saw them again, right? And I felt bad because this was a nice person who came all this way, and because this person wasn't being taken care of and being asked to leave, they actually were harming other visitors, and I didn't like that. So yeah. So and if that is you, don't let one person and one bad experience keep you away from a place that you might like to be.
And Jody says, if one wants to give offering of robes, how to go about doing it if not local? Do you mean to Empty Cloud Monastery, Jody? Are you asking about, like, you want to offer robes maybe on Katina? Maybe we'll come back to that question if they specify that. Okay. And Huyen says, what encouraged you to become a monk?
The Dhamma. Yeah, I mean, I became a meditator not thinking I was going to be a Buddhist, and I became a Buddhist not thinking I was going to be a monk. That's just kind of what happened. As my practice in the Dhamma became more important, and I grew in wisdom and love and confidence for the Buddha and the Dhamma, I wanted to live that life. And I kind of had a lot of experience. I grew up Catholic. And so, like, I had the experience from Catholicism of, like, happy, smiley monks. And then, growing up in the 90s, you see, like, all these happy, smiley Tibetan Buddhist monks on TV. And then in my early days of Buddhism, I got into Ajahn Brahm. And I'm like, I think I want to be a happy, smiley monk. Why not? That sounds like a pretty good life, being a happy, smiley monk. And then, of course, I was told I was a little bit too boisterous and I should calm it down a bit. But yeah, so that was just a gradual progression of the Dhamma taking more priority and importance in my life, and how it changed and benefited me, and how I want to continue on with the path to the end and also share the Dhamma with others.
That one for you, Bhante. Most common. Let's see if Jody. Okay, Jody says yes. Okay, well, Jody, I would just say if you want to send an email to the monastery, which currently is not working, but you could maybe I don't know actually where to send you. I would say maybe if you wait a little bit closer to Katina time. So Katina is usually around October. The email should be working by then. That's when we would be receiving robes, really, with the ceremony and everything. So maybe around closer to October time. Maybe you could go a little bit before. Just send us an email, and then we'll get back to you. Okay. And Rick says, due to limitations of health, energy, and money, I have not been able to maintain my house in a timely manner. Does the Buddha offer guidance for this stage of life where things are decaying faster than our ability to repair them?
Not specifically that I can think of about that specific thing, but there is a matter of kind of letting things go. You know, you kind of have to realize, like, even if you are healthy, there's only so much you can do in a day and only so much you can do in the rest of your life. So you kind of have to triage and decide, well, what's the most important thing? And if you're living by yourself and your health is deteriorating, well, there's some, what's more important, the dust in the corner or the thing you can trip on in the middle? So you make those decisions and you apply your energy, what little energy you have, to the more important things. Sometimes you just have to let it go. It's like, I had a mother who would, make me clean my room and would come in with a white glove and find the dust and then make me do my room over again. And so, like, I had actually really exacting high standards for cleanliness. And to, like, counteract that, sometimes, like, I do the training of just, like, being okay with letting things go. Just like, it's clothes on the floor or whatever. This is all whatever. And of course, I reach a point where, like, okay, I have to clean it. But, like, just being okay with, like, some people, it's like the opposite. You have to be trained, like, especially when you become a monk, you keep things orderly and all this kind of stuff. But for me, it's the opposite. It's like, just let it be there. Just let it be okay. And, it's not going to hurt anybody if this is not exactly as clean or not exactly this or that. So yeah, work within your limitations to make sure that things are maintained as best you can, the most important things.
Yeah, I was thinking also, if you have any, like, nephews or nieces or something, you should call them over and give them the opportunity to make merit and tell them, like, hey, come help me clean. Because don't take it all on your shoulders. Also, that can be really helpful for people. Like, it's an opportunity for them to do something good and help out Uncle Rick or Grandpa Rick or whoever you are to them.
You might have to entice them with some money.
Yeah, I remember my grandma, she was getting old and she said that she would give me some money to help weed the garden and everything. And I was really happy about it. So that opportunity. Okay. And Luciano says, regarding the physical inscription of the entire polycanon on marble slabs in Mandalay, it seems inconceivable that such an undertaking could have been completed manually with the tools of the time. Is this a question or just a comment? Okay. Seems just like a comment about the inscriptions in Mandalay.
I don't know anything about this.
I don't know about it. I think the king or someone ordered the inscription of the canon, maybe. Yeah.
I don't see that being such a, like, impossible thing. I mean, people writing the suttas on marble slabs. I mean, the Sri Lankans wrote it on palm leaves. That's kind of how that survived. So yeah, what's wrong with? I don't see that as being, some kind of wild thing.
Yeah, I think in China or Korea they had it imprinted on wood blocks too, and the canon is so much bigger, even the Chinese canon, because it has so much more, many more texts. Especially if you're in a state where people work for free.
Marble's better. Marble lasts longer.
Yeah. Okay, and Joseph says, warmest wishes, Venerables. May I request teachings on the 3 qualities of Karuna, Anudaya, and Anukampa? I found some more suttas and a 4th quality as well. It says, okay, so the qualities are Karuna, Anudaya, Anukampa, and Anurakha. Compassion, concern, kindness, and protective care. And okay, it looks like this is continuing here. Okay, so here's a concise essence you can share and ask others to expand on. These four, Karuna, Anudaya, Anukampa, and Anurakha, seem to form a spectrum of compassionate wisdom, from feeling suffering to moral concern to responsive engagement to protective care. What do you think? Are they distinctive steps, overlapping aspects, or different names for one function?
Honestly, I'm not really familiar with that sutta or this framing off the top of my head. I don't know if I'd have much to say about it. Sounds to me they're just kind of different aspects of the same thing, right? Engaging with a person in these ways.
Yeah, I mean, often in the suttas they'll give lists of synonyms. It's more of a mnemonic thing, right? Like the Buddha will say in the Dhammacakka Sutta, for example, right? He says wisdom arose, knowledge arose, understanding arose, and then you have to come up with a list of synonyms in English that match all those. And it really doesn't. The details aren't really. It's more because of an oral recitation. It helps if you have a list of words which all say the same thing. So then you kind of remember what the concept is. Like you don't forget. He's saying wisdom, light, knowledge. You get the point that he's making there. So I imagine that, because I remember, Joe, you asked if we could look into this for a future study, and I remember looking at the entry for Anudaya, and it looked like it was just defined and in the exact kind of a synonym for compassion. It wasn't really differentiated, and it looked like in the suttas they didn't really talk about it in detail. And I looked at in the dictionary, it had the explanation from the commentary like listed there in Pali, and the commentary defined Anudaya as wanting to protect, and it's basically this exact word here, Anurakha. So from the traditional commentary point of view, they're considered synonyms. So and those, they also are Pali. You know, they were read in Pali, so they knew Pali better than us. So I imagine that they're probably, like Bhante Jay said. Okay, book says you may reach out to family. And Mary says, welcome back to New Jay, Bhante Jay, keep smiling. And that is the current end of the questions again.
Yeah, I have some question. Yeah, okay. When we do meditate, we sit and we do silent. What we see in the silent? What about Samma Samadhi? What we see on that? Why we have to sit and silent? What we see inside the Samma Samadhi? I would like to know about that.
What do we see in the silent?
Yeah, silent we sit, we do silent. What we see too in that thought? What we get benefit from silence? Forget Samma Samadhi. What we see and feel that. I would like to know about it, about Samma Samadhi.
Yeah, well, the point of it, at least, is to create a mind that can see things as they are. So like the Buddha says that a concentrated mind sees things as they are. So it's not, we're not following the breath. We're not practicing anapanasati just to have a calm, peaceful mind. We're trying to develop that mind so we can see anicca, dukkha, anatta, so we can see the nature of reality and gain wisdom from that mind. Right? So that's why the Buddha talks about jhanas all the time. Jhana, samadhi, very important. Not because it's pleasurable and nice and peaceful to just sit there like this all day. No, it's so that we can free ourselves by seeing things as they are. So when your mind becomes calm and peaceful, you start to see anicca, dukkha, anatta, right? And in the deepest jhanas, Bhante Gunaratana, my teacher, my preceptor, would say, in the fourth jhana, you can see anicca at the deepest level, right? Because your mind is so clear, no likes and dislikes, no pain and pleasure. All of that is subdued. And so you can see very clearly the nature of reality.
see. That means we see Trilak in Samma Samadhi, right?
In what?
We see Trilak in Samma Samadhi, right?
3 characteristics.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. And make me remember when Pante Wata talk about the wind sound. He talk about the wind really have sound. Then we think about, oh, that's why we do silent, because everything is just quiet. But we just the object. Maybe understand more. We just the object. The wind come see us, touch us. That's why it's the noise come out. The silence that what I understand is just quiet. The same samadhi. And maybe understand more is when we do silence, maybe we can see Trilak, just the emptiness.
And there's external silence,
Yes.
like being in the monastery during meditation time, and there's internal silence, noble silence, the Buddha says.
Empty, right?
Yeah.
Empty, like, okay, then we make understand more, because last time when they talk about the wind don't have sound, everything don't have sound, because the thing just had the object. That's why everything happened.
So people get too attached to needing external silence in their meditation.
I see.
But a real practitioner could go to New York City on 42nd Street, one of the busiest places in America, and sit down and close their eyes, and then their mind is quiet.
I see.
Around them, very busy. Millions of people. But, yes.
We can see Trilak.
Yeah, internal silence is the most important silence.
Okay, Victoria asks, has anyone in either of your families participated in ceremonies where bowing and chanting are involved?
No.
In my family, they have all of them, bowing and chanting.
No.
My mother has been to the monastery. She even participated in part of a retreat here. During the winter retreat, she came and she did the bowing. Actually, when she first came here, she was bowing. She was doing the bowing and also the chanting. And even when I went to visit them, we did morning puja together. And she did some chanting. We chanted the Metta Sutta. Even though she's Christian, she likes the chanting actually in Pali. She really liked the Pali chanting. And also meditating and also the bowing. She does the bowing. She bows to the Buddha. She bows to the monks. She did all the bowing. And then my sister was also here for my ordination, and my father. And I don't know if they did the chanting and the bowing. Actually, I can't remember. But they were they saw it. They were witnessing it. And I can't remember if they were doing it themselves, but they were there and they were partaking of they were seeing it. And Victoria says, has anyone in your family been influenced by Buddhism?
Me. Yeah, that's about it.
Your family didn't take to any practices, Bhante?
Nope.
I would say my family's been influenced by Buddhism to an extent. I mean, my mom definitely has. She offered dana today. It's like a super dana. And she, I think that a lot of her influence from Buddhism, I would say, is really because of her own spiritual practice, being a Christian. I think she just was really open to a lot of the concepts and ideas were somewhat familiar to her, and she was open to it and trying it out. And also, she recently started learning. She learned yoga. She did yoga, and I think that then that was also kind of she started opening to. She was doing other practices which weren't specifically Christian, and so yeah, also like the Buddhist practices kind of fit like a hand in a glove in terms of what she was learning there. And my sister, actually, when I started talking to her some about Buddhism, she was interested. She wanted to practice. She got some free books from a monastery, and she did some meditation, and she even gave up drinking energy drinks for a while when we talked about sensual pleasures. And she wanted to come to the monastery also on her own without the parents kind of being there, but it hasn't happened yet. So.
I had my first ever energy drink on a long trip in Colorado.
Really?
It was from some like natural thing, and it was called Guru. It was all natural flavors. It was interesting.
It was the first one, huh?
Yeah. I usually, yeah.
Yeah, now they're really popular. Yeah.
The chemicals and everything in it just never looked appealing to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we're at the end.
Yeah. Okay. Should we close up? Or
Let's
a few
give it
moments?
another minute or
Okay.
two just to see, because sometimes there's a lag in the chat and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, there was.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Max says, "Dear Bantes, do you have any advice on engaging with others unfamiliar with Buddhism without seeming forceful?"
Yeah, it depends on what do you mean by engaging. Like, for instance, like I'm from an Italian Catholic family. My mother was born in Italy. Both sides of my family are basically from Italy. And although I assume will say I'm not Italian. My mother is, just not me. But
It doesn't work the Jewish way.
no.
Mom is Jewish.
And so, when I became a Buddhist, it didn't impact them at all. Like, it wasn't like I was eating with them and they're like, do like grace. And I'm like, now we have to do it the Buddhist way and all these kind of things. Like, my becoming a Buddhist did not kind of impact them or force them into anything at all. And I think that's the most important thing. Even Buddhist monks are not allowed to actually talk about Buddhism unless we're asked. Like, we can't give a Dhamma talk. We can't just go up to somebody and say, have you heard about the good news of our Lord and Savior Buddha? Knock on your door, things like that. And I think that's a very wise way of doing it. Because you don't want to force your kind of view or belief on other people, even in like a minuscule way. You might think, oh, this is such wise, wonderful stuff. Maybe my, horrible relative could do some really good, but the Buddha taught, if you listen to the Buddha says there's, you have to say something that's truthful, beneficial, that's kind and will be taken well, that's said at the right time. There's all kinds of, if you want to say something or try to, there's a lot of factors that go into how the person is going to ingest or react to what you're trying to say. Right? So I think it's just very important that you show more than tell when it comes to Buddhism, right? You show that you are more peaceful, you're more wise, you're more kind over time, and then people say, oh, that's interesting. What's going on with that? And then they ask questions. So I think it's important to not use your Buddhism as like a wedge or as like an attack or like a kind of like, intellectual or spiritual jousting and things like that. Yeah. Show, don't tell.
Okay, we have another question from Joe. It says, the Buddha teaches free from attachment, guided by anukampa and anudaya. A disciple teaches Dhamma purely through karuna, anudaya, and anukampa. So these are two quotes from the suttas. How do you personally cultivate these qualities, tender concern, resonant kindness, and compassionate care in your Dhamma life?
I think these naturally arise through wisdom. When you start to really understand how things are, it's just something that naturally arises. But with that wisdom comes also, this compassion and care, very nice words. It comes the wisdom to understand the limitations of that. Like, even the Buddha, basically, like, the Buddha's asked the question, like, how many people will become awakened? And the Buddha's like, I'm not concerned with how many people will become awakened. But I do know that anybody who follows the Noble Eightfold Path will become awakened. Right? The Buddha says things like, I cannot lead people to awakening. The Buddha's only point the way. Right? So the Buddha, who's famous for his compassion, also understands that even he has limitations. Right? Like, he can't bring it. What is the old saying? You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. right? So you have these kind of limitations and understandings, kind of like a wise limitation on your expectations when it comes to these things. So, me as somebody who likes to share the Dhamma with people, actually, I have no attachment to what how I say something or what I should say something or how that's going to impact another person. Because you know why? Because I have nothing to do with that. Because I've given a talk and I don't know anybody in the thing, and the person comes up and that's exactly what I wanted to hear. It's one of the most amazing things, and I have all this insight, blah, blah, blah. That had nothing to do with me whatsoever. I just talked, right? So having this kind of understanding of, you're sharing the Dhamma, you're giving of your energy, you're doing all these things. And if it benefits, it benefits. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And leaving it at that. So you're like being kind of unattached to any results of you trying, being very compassionate and concerned and kindness and all these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing for me also is looking at just in general, where are the opposites of these qualities? Like, for example, you talk about someone would teach out of these qualities, or the Buddha gives teachings from these qualities, and you start seeing like what are the opposites, right? So things like personal fame or reputation, wanting to be praised or liked, or wanting to get material things, like people offer more donations, or wanting to change how people are, right? Like the example Bhante gave of the relative maybe doesn't act so well, so you start teaching them the teachings that you want them to start practicing, right? So kind of the opposite of that. And then you start to see how compassion, when you start working on those negative qualities, and compassion can really start to come out. Like you start to empathize with people more, and it doesn't have to be the particulars of the person, but you start to understand like, oh, it's not about what I like or what I don't like or what I want from this or what I don't want from this, but you start to see like, oh, well, these people have suffering. These people have their own perspectives and their own lives and their own pursuits and their own interests. And then you start to see that actually the Dhamma can benefit them, not because of what you want, not because of what you like or what you think about it, but because of their own benefit and the benefit of other people and so on. So then you start to kind of, the negatives and the compassion, they kind of go hand in hand in the sense of it's always a response to the opposite. That's why the Buddha says they teach out of these qualities, because he's contrasting it to what they wouldn't be, the negative qualities that they would be teaching out of it. And so, yeah, I think just practicing loving kindness and starting to understand how other people feel suffering and other people's perspectives, then also that starts to balance out the negative quality of like, oh, I want to do this from my perspective. Because you start to have understanding that, oh, other people also have suffering, and that this is about, it's about them. It's about, the Dhamma benefiting people, not about what I want and so on. So I think that's one thing that comes to mind. Okay, and Brick has a question, says, I used to feel driven to accomplish or experience things at a high level, developing dispassion in worldly pursuits while being inspired to remain dedicated to Buddhist practice have led to peace and contentment. I am grateful. However, I have little motivation to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Do you have any guidance?
So how do you find the motivation? Right? That's kind of the crux of the question, isn't it? How do you get the motivation? Where do you search for it? What are the causes and conditions that would lead to the motivation to arise? Right? You have this lifelong physical, struggles and issues and things like this, and obviously you're not inclined to try to end it all and all these kind of things, as you've been doing this for a long time and you're a serious Buddhist practitioner and all that. And it sounds to me like you're kind of at your wit's end. You're You're exhausted, you're tired, and maybe hoping for a quick end, but that's not always what we get. And so what is the motivation to keep going? And to think about it in a Buddhist perspective is, yeah, it's rough, but you're a human and you might have, I don't know how many years left. So you don't know what your next life is going to be. Might as well try to make the best of it, what you have left, even with all your struggles, even with all the horrible stuff, and the physical issues and all that. Right? Keep putting one foot in front of the other. That's all it needs to be. Day to day, 1 foot in front of the other is 1 day in front of the other. Did I do the best that I could today within my limitations, right? Did I develop the qualities that would lead to me having motivation? And in the commentaries in different places, there's different things like good Kalyanamitas, engaging with them, listening to the Dhamma, stuff like that. These things that will bring up the qualities of motivation in your practice. And it's more about, in my opinion, it's more about the long-term motivation than the short-term, because in the short term, your practice is always just going to go up and down. Even as a monk, the practice just goes up and down. But if you're kind of on a good trend line, over the long period of time, then that's good. So examine the causes and conditions that may bring more motivation to endure, and make the most of the time you have left.
Yeah, just today we were talking about recollecting the Buddha and the qualities of the Buddha, and one of the ones that really strikes me so heavily is the Buddhist quality of energy. Right? There's one sutta where all the monks are in the forest and it's a beautiful night, and they say, "Oh, what kind of monk would make this forest so even more beautiful?" Right? And Ananda says, "Oh, if someone knew memorized lots of suttas and was really learned and recited, if they were sitting in the woods, it would be so beautiful." And then Anuruddha says, "Oh, if someone had a divine eye that could see all the different beings in the different universes, that would make it so beautiful." And all the different monks says the type of monk, the type of practitioner, if they were sitting in the grove, it would be so, so beautiful. And then they say, "Oh, let's go to the Buddha and let's ask him which one of us is right, which one of us got it right here," right? And most of them are arahants. And so they go to the Buddha, and the Buddha says, "Actually, yeah, you were all right in one way. Yeah, it would be really beautiful if someone was really learned, or if someone had the divine eye, or if someone was a great meditator." And he says, "Yeah, that would be really beautiful." But he gives his own take on it. And the Buddha says, "But you know what I think it would be best?" And he doesn't list like a result. He doesn't list like a quality, like, "Oh, it would be someone who has this quality," right? But he says it's someone who would sit down and they would say, "Gladly let my flesh and my flesh dry up and my bones remain, and let only sinew and flesh be left. I will not get up until I attain what can be attained through human vigor, through human strength, through human striving." So it's actually the conditions, like the Bhante was referring to. It's that condition of energy. And when you think about the life of the Buddha, before he attained awakening, it's just insane the amount of dedication that it takes. He was the best probably meditator that existed in the world before he became the Buddha. If you just look at world history, India had probably the most advanced meditation spiritual masters that existed, right? In terms of spiritual systems, meditation. He had attained the state of the sphere of nothingness. He became a teacher. He knew the teachings. He had a community. He had a reputation. And you might think, "Oh, he got lots of peace and contentment, lots of dispassion, grateful, right? Might as well just live out his life like that." But he wasn't contented. So then he went to another teacher. He surpassed that teacher. Now he really was the best, the highest I possibly could be. And then he's not content with that. Then he tortures his body. He's starving. Just imagine day by day, he's thinking, he already was a teacher, had all these meditations. Now he's eating cow feces and living in a barn and walking on all fours. And you might think that, okay, he's probably got enough dispassion now. He might just live out his days, but he keeps going. And then that doesn't work out. So he's almost killed himself now. Even that doesn't work. He's reached the pinnacle of what he can reach. He's nearly killed himself to death. And then he still says, you know what, I'm going to sit here and I'm not going to get up until I attain awakening. And then he still does it. So, and then he attains awakening after, his long retirement plan. He's finally reached it since beginningless time. He's finally reached the end. He doesn't want to retire and have a nice time, but he actually dedicates 45 years of his life teaching, naughty lay people, naughty monks who don't practice well enough and misbehave and they break the rules, and he has people arguing and fighting, and he travels all that way to teach the monks who are arguing, and they dismiss him, say, why don't you mind your own business, Buddha, we'll do this here, right? And he just keeps teaching until he dies, surrounded by people. He probably would prefer to die in peace, right? Just alone. At one point he says that people come to visit him, and his attendant says, you should really let the people in, let them see you. And he says, no, let me never become famous. Let me never become famous, because when I'm in the woods, I can urinate and defecate and no one's around. And well, he did become famous. In fact, he became really famous. And he sacrificed, and, he didn't just because of his peace and contentment give up. His life is the amount of effort and energy he put forth, despite the difficulty, and in fact, his also success, is really unthinkable. It's hard to even determine to sit for 4 hours. Let alone, like, you're going to let your body die there after you've already nearly killed yourself for 6 years and already been the most advanced meditation teacher that existed twice, basically. So I think that we can look to those stories and see, like, wow, it's really amazing what people can accomplish through, despite the challenges, and also despite their accomplishments, what they'll keep going forward with.
Dreadful monks is praise, honor, and gain. Nothing more destructive to the holy life than praise, honor, and gain.
Okay, and Victoria says, I plan on visiting some Buddhist communities for Vesak celebrations, but can you recommend what lay people can do at home if they can't visit a monastery, or if they just want some personal ceremony?
Well, I mean, Vesak is basically a reflection of the Buddha, right? Because he was born, achieved awakening, and was finally extinguished on a full moon in May, right? So the whole thing is about the Buddha. So reflect about the Buddha, right? Reflect on the qualities of the Buddha. Reflect on what your thoughts about the Buddha, and your any gratitude, and that's what I would say. I mean, that's pretty much, like, you go to enough Vesaks and you hear just the same talk every time, because that's what it's about. Doesn't matter what monk, doesn't matter what monastery, it's the same talk every time, everywhere, because it's about the Buddha, right? And so think about ways that you can pay respects to the Buddha, and reflect on your gratitude, or reflect on his teachings, and that's good enough, I think.
Yeah, I think practicing will get the closest, right? Maybe see, there was the story of the monk who was sick, and he goes to see the Buddha. He says, finally, I get to see the Buddha. And the Buddha's visiting him, and the Buddha says, why do you care about this putrid body? One who sees the Dhamma sees me. And so, yeah, I'm sure the Buddha would prefer that we practice really sincerely, instead of going to look at a statue.
Yeah. The one who praises me the most is the one who practices the Dhamma.
And that looks like the same question. Okay. And Shelley Lim, hello, Shelley, says, hello, Bantes. I have a personal question about knowing someone who is a medium. I know the Buddha mentioned something like esoteric knowledge is not helpful for the path, but I was wondering if you might know anything. If you might know anything about this.
There's all kinds of interesting powers and experiences in life. The Buddha was only concerned with what brought the end of suffering. So, the Buddha acknowledges that there's all kinds of powers that you can gain from the deep meditation, but he also says that they're not really important. They're not really useful. They're not really for awakening. They're kind of just side effects, and they shouldn't be attached to them. So somebody who's a medium, that They might actually be a medium. They might be a fraud. Who knows? I don't know. The world is wide and weird and interesting. All kinds of things can be true. So, yeah.
And Rick says, do you know of any monasteries or meditation centers that welcome lay practitioners who have disabilities? Do you have any examples of how disabled people were able to practice in harmony with others?
That becomes tough. That becomes tough. I think it depends on how much of a kind of retreat public center they are. Because I remember at Bhavana Society, while I was there, more and more we had to do various things. Like we had to make sure there were ramps and stuff like that. But that was because we technically, quote unquote, serve the public according to the government, and so we had to follow all kinds of different rules. But many monasteries don't fall under that, so they don't have to kind of do a lot of these extra things, and it can be unless it's a very well supported monastery, those kind of things can be a burden to the monastery. When somebody goes to be a resident at a monastery, usually it's to go help the monastery. And if somebody is kind of going to require the monastery have more work, then it's actually usually not the best. It's like, I'm sorry, like I remember the office manager would say, like, somebody who has mental health issues or whatever, she's like, we're not equipped to handle such and such. And so it would depend. It would depend a lot on how much of a burden that would be for the monastery, and if it's not too much of a burden and you can actually support in some way or another, it doesn't have to be like going out and chopping wood and stuff like that, then you could probably find a place. You might try Bhavana Society. They have wheelchair ramps and all kinds of stuff, so it might be a little bit easier for you. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like it really depends on the disability. I mean, we've had people here who, it's really common, people need to sit in a chair and they can't really lift things because they have back problems, but I wouldn't really consider that like a major. So there's also been someone who recently had brain surgery staying here actually. And they were eating a little bit of extra, they needed to eat some extra food. So we allowed them to have a little snack basically. And they were sleeping, and maybe they were on the first floor and so on because of stairs. But they were able to walk around. But yeah, because this monastery is not really equipped for wheelchairs, but I'm sure, like Bhante mentioned, Bob, and I'm sure there are monasteries who could accommodate people in wheelchairs. So it depends on the disability, I think. Okay, and Joe has another question here. Says, in Anguttara Nikaya 3.26, the Buddha says to avoid associating with unethical people, except out of anuddhya, tender concern, and anukampa, compassionate responsiveness. How do we wisely balance protecting the heart while still relating with care?
Actually, I like to read this because most of the time the Buddha is just like, it's better to be alone than to be with foolish people. I like to see the context of this. What?
Should I pull it up now? Or?
Not right now. We don't have, protecting the heart while still relating with care. You can wish for a person to, you can have metta for a person and compassion for a person, fully understanding that they are still just going to keep causing themselves suffering, right? Like your metta, your karuna for that person is not connected to their response or what they do, right? and if you are, and if it is, then you're probably attached to something you shouldn't be attached to, right? It's about really the mind, right? Can you have goodwill and compassion and all these things, and also not be overly attached to the person's suffering? Right? A foolish person is a foolish person. And the Buddha says in the Dhammapada, one should not sacrifice one's own welfare for the sake of another, no matter how great the need. As the Buddha is very clear, like, you have to make sure that you protect yourself and you have your boundaries and all these things. And what other people do is what other people do. You can have compassion for them all you want. But if your compassion is connected to some kind of result you want for them, and if that result doesn't happen, you suffer because of it, then you have an attachment, then that's not going to be very skillful. So I guess that would be the wise way of doing things, right? You can have compassion and you can have goodwill and all these things in your mind, and also know that you never want to see this person ever again, because their influence is, what they do is very unskillful, and you don't need to be around it.
Yeah, it comes to mind for me. I was thinking of like, what is a real example of how this would be played out? And I was thinking maybe like, for example, people who do work with drug addicts, maybe people who steal, people who lie, maybe people even who kill, and who are obviously taking intoxicants and maybe also breaking all the precepts, left and right, but they do it out of compassion, specifically in order to help them. And often that can be really transformative. But as Bante said, then the problem, then sometimes they get like a fatigue, right? Because you help so many people, but then they keep running into the same problems, and then you want them to succeed, but then they don't. So I feel that maybe like a real example of where that would really play out is if you do like volunteer work, or you start associating with people who really you wouldn't want to be their friends. Like, that's not the type of people you'd want to be friends with from a Buddhist perspective. But there are centers who it's really important what they do, helping, and they do it out of compassion. And if you remember that, exactly that point of like, well, this is not out of wanting a result, but it's simply out of trying to develop the heart to help in a way which is relevant. Like, if that's an opportunity that you have, then yeah, that might be a time when actually you associate with an unethical person. I mean, from the Buddhist perspective, he was associating with unethical people all the time, and thank goodness, right? Otherwise, we would be left in the dust. So there are times when it's really, but it's coming from a place of like, you have to be in a better place. Like recently, someone works. I was talking today that someone that I know, they worked for like a psych ward, a kind of mental health facility for children who have all kinds of mental health problems. And they recently transferred, and they're working with children, and now they themselves are admitted to a psych ward because of major depression. And I think that one of probably the main factors is just seeing all the suffering with the children being, so in such a difficult situation. And so I think that's a case where you can see like, if you're able to handle a certain amount of helping, then that's also, that's a good thing. But it can really, you have to be very careful not to fall into something like that, because it can really drag you down.
Mm-hmm. You have to know the difference between your suffering and other people's suffering in a job like that. And if you can't do that, then you don't last. It just doesn't work. I saw that in my career all the time. Most people didn't last 2-3 years. They were gone. So that's, if you are trying to help somebody and you fall in the mud with them, the Buddha says you can't help somebody out of the mud if you're in the mud yourself. So if you're trying to help somebody with their suffering, if you're down in there suffering with them, you're not going to help them. That's just not how it works. And to be honest with you, like, I did my career for 8 years. I don't think I helped one person. Right? And I had like over 200 cases. The best I did was when people actually wanted to change. That's the most important thing, right? Somebody wanted to change, wanted to do better, and then I could help them a little bit, just like I have a shoulder to help them. But you can't just drag people, no matter how much you think, you know the answer, or you want to help them or anything like that. I know. I mean, I've wanted to be a knight my whole life. I've wanted to just help people from a young age. I'm going to help people, and my life thankfully has given me examples of how me trying to help people caused more suffering because of my lack of wisdom and things like that. And so, yeah, you need more than just like compassion and care and all these things. You need wisdom to go along with that, so that you actually might be able to do something.
Okay. And then Rick just says, clarification, I'm not wanting life to end. If I have my dogs and my home, I feel motivated to be of love and service to them. Without them, however, I don't have the internal motivation to keep going. Is there a way to develop internal motivation not dependent on clinging to my dogs and home?
Yeah, the Dhamma. Right? What happens when the mountains are closing in? How many times have I said, you've heard me say this, Rick, right? The Dhamma, doing good deeds, and the Dhamma. The only refuge in this life is the teaching that leads to the true refuge, because there's no other refuge. The Buddha tells us very clearly, there is no refuge in samsara. There is no place you can go that has any kind of safety, security, or refuge. That's why I always say that the funny thing about Buddhism is that when you go for refuge to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, you're going for refuge to the fact that there's no refuge. Right? The Buddha says the only safety, the only freedom is awakening, is nibbana. Right? So see if you can put that that motivation in the Dhamma itself. Right? You listen and use the Dhamma to help you to build the motivation. Right? And maybe you do have to do some external things. Maybe you have to look out to, trying to find ways to help others or connect with others, like going to a monastery, these kind of things. But it has to come from inside, right? The motivation only comes from inside. So you have to find it. Yeah? Nobody can kind of tell you what will motivate you. You have to look for it.
And Kristen has a question about the conversation before. How can one differentiate between sensitivity to worldly stimuli being unhelpful to practice versus needing to develop more equanimity?
Well, what I would say is train yourself to be, as they say, anti-fragile. One of my favorite words, right? Train yourself not to be attached to needing a quiet place to meditate. Train yourself to meditate. Honestly, what I meditated, I never meditated in a room by myself. I meditated outside. Usually I meditate at my office along a major road before work. So there was always cars, there was always activity, there was always stuff going on. And I did my walking meditation, I did my sitting meditation, right? And when you actually train it, one of the benefits of walking meditation, the Buddha says, is that the meditation gained from that, or the concentration gained from that, is durable. Meaning concentration gained from walking meditation is way stronger than concentrating gained from trying to sit in a quiet place and hoping nothing bothers you. So that's what I would say. Right? If you train in the world, then you expect that things will happen and it won't bother you. Right? If you train like, I need to have my quiet time in my room and my kids are always bothering me, or my dog is always bothering me, or this is always bothering me, well, you're setting yourself for failure. You're too attached to having certain conditions. You have to train to be able to, practice in any conditions. In the very beginning, as a practitioner, yes, having a nice quiet place can be helpful. But I personally would say after a certain while, let that go. Train yourself to be able to practice anywhere.
This reminds me recently. Oh, sorry, one, two.
No, go.
Okay, this reminds me recently when I was in Italy and we were actually, it wasn't like a romantic stay in the forest, meditating in the caves, but actually it was mostly in the town. And even in like a small rural town, you can really feel the difference between being in nature. And it wasn't just in a town; it was mostly in the apartment of a crazy, demented lady who was Ayasama's beloved mother. Who is a sweetheart, but also has an anger problem. And every now and then she has these slippers, and so she would go to bed, right, as an old lady does, and you start to get like every time you hear you know oh, she's up, she's coming, and then she starts moving things around, and then if you want to have like a conversation, every maybe 2 minutes she'll interrupt and she'll start asking questions that are completely unrelated to reality and start shifting things around and picking things up and washing the dishes by running water over them, and then so constantly like moving around and talking and then getting upset and yelling and so on. And like in a situation like that, someone recently was asking at a certain point, like, how do we distinguish between kaya viveka, like the seclusion of body, and chitta viveka, the same type of thing? And they were saying they're a layperson, very busy. And I feel that you have to kind of discern, like, when it's time to be in a noisy environment, it's not time to just sit down and do a meditation retreat. That's not the third time. Like, your practice has to be flexible, as Bhante was also alluding to, of like, also like the way that I was taking it was when I'm with the mother, it's time to develop compassion. It's time to develop patience. It's time to develop letting go of my preferences, letting go of my, how things should go. And it's like, I'm just here it's not going to go however I would want it to go. It's just going to, and that's with practice, right? That is a really good practice. It's time to develop compassion. However, as a monk, that's not what I would want to be doing with my life. So you also have to evaluate, like, what are your choices, right? So if I choose to be there all the time, constantly, well, I'm going to be making choices which are in the long term detrimental to being able to have more quiet meditation time, in the sense of like, not having to get up every now and then to help someone who's in need. So also looking at like, what are your decisions? So like when someone recently was asking, oh, I'm so busy, how do I find seclusion? It's like, well, have you considered moving? If you want to be more secluded, you can't be busy and then want seclusion. So you have to say, okay, well, now my practice is something else. My practice is loving kindness. My practice is patience. My practice is meditating with whatever conditions and just being content with that and not expecting. But you can't also then expect it to go how it would in a different condition. You have to have the ability to be flexible. Like, okay, the practice looks different, right? When you're in the middle of the street, it's not time to sit down and do a meditation retreat. It's time to cross the street with mindfulness. That doesn't mean you can't develop those same qualities, and I feel that that's the same with people who have a busy life, like just really seeing, what a layperson's life is like for those few months also, right? Taking care of people and running errands and so on. You start to see like, yeah, there's only certain things you can do. It's not the type of practice you do in the cave. But it is still a practice, and you can still turn it into a Dhamma practice. It's just like whenever you have an expectation, to that extent, you're going to be disappointed. So an expectation of, quiet and so on is the exact same, I feel. Okay, and Rick says deep gratitude, sadhu Rick. And Merida says that her cat meows loudly. And Mary reminds us that there's 7 minutes left. And we're at the end of the questions online.
Mm-hmm.
So if nothing comes in these next few moments, maybe we'll call it a night.
Yeah.
Great. People sending in.
All right. I think we're good.
Okay. Any closing words, Bhante?
No, practice well and be well.
Okay. Yep. Have a good night, and we'll see some of you on Vesak this Sunday, or the Saturday program tomorrow evening.
The mountains are closing in.
Yeah. Great. Have a good night.